we crashed an aircraft
Oh shit.
on July 4th weekend, and both pilots were killed. Little 58. It wasn't a combat incident. They actually hit some power lines and just straight into the ground. Um, Part of being part of that movement team was I was responsible for cleaning up that aircraft and boxing it up and shipping it off to the crash investigation facility. And that was the first time I ever had to hose blood out of something that was not just me bleeding on something. It was pretty traumatic, I guess would be the word for it. And after the first trip over to Iraq and not having to deal with anything like that, that was not the first, or that was the first time, but not the last time I had to deal with aircraft crashes. Hey everybody, I'm Danny Weatherly. I'm originally an Army brat, so I'm kind of from all over, but I grew up mostly in Louisiana. My wife is also from Louisiana, met while I was in the military. Nice story. I have two kids, and they're both grown, 30 and 27, and we we stayed in the military for almost 23 years and went everywhere.
How would you describe your time just in the army? Like what experience did you kind of have?
Well, when I joined the Army, I fully intended from day one to do 20 years. It was, my father was a retiree. I saw the benefits of it. I wanted to do it. I was fortunate in choosing aviation as my branch, mostly because there are a lot of intangibles to being in aviation. It's, people say, oh, it's a soft life, it's an easier life. It's not, it's hard, but you meet some of the most well-rounded, super intelligent people in aviation that you will ever meet anywhere. I started off on Cobras. There's one right over there up on the stand. I retired Cobras after 2 years. I was only in the Army 2 years, and they pulled an aircraft out from under my feet and said, no more. So then I did 20 years with 58 Deltas and loved every minute of it, loved my career, wouldn't change any of it for anything. I had a great career.
So like after the Cobras went away, were you forced to go to the
Yeah,
Warriors?
I was not given a choice. They said, okay, you're no longer with Cobras. This is your job now. And so I came right back here to Fort Eustis, went to school for 6 weeks, and had a new MOS.
Do you think the community was different from the Cobra community to the Kiowa community?
Not really that different because it was the same people. We all got eliminated from one helicopter, and most of us went straight to the same units that we were in before. So I didn't change units when they pulled the Cobras and gave us the 58s. I stayed in the same place, doing the same thing with the same people, and it was just wonderful. I loved
Yeah,
it.
I wonder if that's the same thing that the 58 guys or the Kiowa Warrior guys to the Apache because it also got,
Yep.
taken out.
I was in Hawaii when they finally canceled the 58 program completely, but I was at the very last end of my career, so I didn't transition to the Apaches. But when I retired and came back as a civilian instructor, hey, I'm teaching Apaches. So I had to learn the aircraft while teaching it. So,
What would you say is some of your most memorable moments?
whew, good points and bad points. There's a bit of both. My first trip over to Iraq was pretty uneventful. My second trip over, we were on the ground. It was 4th of July weekend. I forget the exact year, 2006, 2007, 4th of July weekend. I was in a position where I was part of the unit movement team, so I was responsible for moving equipment in and out. And the unfortunate part of that is we crashed an aircraft
Oh shit.
on July 4th weekend, and both pilots were killed. Little 58. It wasn't a combat incident. They actually hit some power lines and just straight into the ground. part of being part of that movement team was I was responsible for cleaning up that aircraft and boxing it up and shipping it off to the crash investigation facility. And that was the first time I ever had to hose blood out of something that was not just me bleeding on something. It was pretty traumatic, I guess would be the word for it. And after the first trip over to Iraq and not having to deal with anything like that, that was not the first, or that was the first time, but not the last time I had to deal with aircraft crashes and so forth. And
Yeah, I will tell you that
yeah,
since I've been in the military, so 17 years, I remember I think I was in 4-6 at the point in time, and same idea. We obviously were just they were flying, they were doing NVGs, and two Kiowa Warriors crashed right into each other, and all four pilots died.
that's I at this point I had been in the Army 12 years or so, 13 years, and I'd been involved with crash investigations and aircraft recovery, but this is the first time that I personally
Yeah,
had to deal with that. And
you think that like weighed on your conscience at all?
it still does. I don't want to make this a sad interview or anything, but I have night terrors that frequently involve stuff like this. But it's not bad,
Yeah.
or not frequent, but when it comes up, it shakes me for a few days when it hits again. Good things. Let's change that a little bit. Right here at Fort Eustis, this was a couple of years before I retired, so call it 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. I got involved with the Fort Eustis Army 10 miler team and met some really outstanding people, and I widely consider this some of the best times of my career. Training with people from all MOSs all over this post. Had some officers, West Point graduates, and a lady that was a major at the time. She eventually became a doctor, not medical doctor, but no. We traveled up to DC and did the Army 10 miler for like 5 years in a row, just training and working with them. I used to be in shape. I'm kind of chunked up now, but COVID and an appendectomy will do that to you. We had first, second, and third place finishes 3 years in a row before I had to PCS and came back later and finished up with them for a couple more years. But just absolute wonderful people running in places that you would never think of. Running in DC, if you ever get a chance, go run the National Mall in DC. It's an amazing experience. And if you get a chance, do the Army 10 miler or the Marine Corps Marathon, which I've also run. There's nothing like running through our nation's capital with 30,000 of your closest friends. It's an amazing experience. Other things I got to do, I spent 3 years in Germany. My family and I traveled all over the place, and it was right at the time when the European Union was kicking off and the transition from Deutschmarks to Euros and open borders, just driving through and no passports showing. It was so incredible.
What was your favorite country over there?
Luxembourg, actually. I love the tiny little country of Luxembourg. It's just so compact and everything's stunningly beautiful. It was the first place I'd ever seen. They had highways and then they had overpasses for the highways that were planted with trees and grass for the animals to get across the highway safely, which I thought was amazing. It's such a beautiful place.
What about for food wise? Same place or a different place?
The food all across Europe, it changes so much from place to place. I love German food, but I also loved going down in the city while you're there. Instead of eating German food, going to get Turkish food, a Turkish pizza or kebabs or whatever, and just so cosmopolitan. You can eat anything at any time. The best Chinese food I've ever had in my life was in a small town in Germany. Weird.
Yeah, when speaking of that, when I was stationed in Hawaii,
Yeah, that's where we met actually.
yeah, when I was stationed in Hawaii, I used to live in Waikiki.
Yeah.
So uh, there was this little Italian restaurant. And for the people that don't know about Hawaii, it's like a mix of different Asians and Polynesian cultures.
Yep.
And right outside of my neighborhood, there was this little pizza place. I think it was called Anna's or something. And I
I
don't know if
remember
you've ever
that.
been there.
I have. Yeah, it's good food. Yeah.
This lady comes out and she's the same person over and over. Asian, like straight up Asian lady, but literally the best Italian food I've ever had.
Nice. That's
And
awesome.
yeah, and it's probably very similar to what you were just saying, like best Chinese food in Germany.
Yeah. It's so weird. Speaking of Hawaii, that was some of my favorite times. I learned how to scuba dive in Hawaii. I just spent every moment I could underwater, which is weird because I don't really like going to beaches. I get nothing out of laying on the beach and just being there, but being in the water, under the water, awesome. Let's go.
We were talking about some of the bad times, some of the good times, and then you were talking about just food in general. You said
Yeah.
there's Turkish food.
Yeah.
I've never been to Germany, but what I've been told is that Turkish people, like the adult males, try to always fight the U.S. soldiers and sailors. Have you heard of that?
I have heard it. I did not experience it firsthand. Never had a problem in Germany.
Did you go out, or were you
Yeah.
married at that time? And
We
like,
were married, but we would go out everywhere.
okay, huh? I wonder if the people I'm talking to are just like in bad spots
That
or acting like a fool. Like,
Yeah, and that happens. I mean, people. I'm a pretty laid back guy. It takes a lot to get me riled up. So getting in a fight in public is not something that's ever going to happen unless somebody is messing with my family, and you just don't put yourself in those situations. Speaking of Germany and good times and dichotomies and weird things you don't think about. When I first got there, before my family came over, we used to go to this, the guys I would work with would go to this place called the Rod and Gun Club, which is just a little restaurant bar with live music and sometimes dancing and stuff like that. You know, it's a country bar. They're playing country music. No big deal. You walk out the front door and you are literally a quarter mile from the cooling tower of a nuclear power plant. You're like, okay. You go back inside and you realize that this is not an American specific club, but it's a country club. And you're watching all these German people line dancing to American country music underneath the cooling towers of a nuclear power plant. Then on the other side was a castle. You're like, this is just bizarre.
you joined in what year did you join?
92.
All right, so from '92 to when you got out, which was
2015,
okay, so
2014, 15, yeah, somewhere.
2015. Was there a huge difference between when you first joined to when you got out, or even to now? Because you're still actively involved with soldiers every day. So what does that look like?
The biggest thing is the sheer number of people. When I first joined, we had Army cooks, Army drivers, Army everything, took care of everyone. Now, your dining facilities are manned by civilians. You don't have Army cooks anywhere anymore. The Army has shrunk. We are not the Cold War force that we used to be. It's tiny compared to what it used to be. That's one thing. And of course, you know, I retired 2 aircraft. I retired the Cobra and the 58. Now we got Apaches, and they're still searching for a replacement 8 years later for the 58.
You think that's a good thing?
I think that them not rushing to a decision and just picking something to get something out there is a good thing. I think that they tried to make the Apache into something that it's not. It's too big to be a reconnaissance helicopter. I'm sorry, it is.
Yeah.
It's too big, too loud. But it can look at things a long way off. The technology has changed everywhere. Minor example, working on an aircraft, you used to have to carry a logbook out there, carry a technical manual out there, and everything was written up on paper. I don't think soldiers even know how to write their names with an actual pen anymore.
I don't think soldiers know how to do cursive anymore. I don't
No,
think
they
anybody
definitely
knows
don't
how
that.
to do cursive.
I can still cursive, but my handwriting was always atrocious. But yeah, the march of technology, I think it's interesting that the uniforms have changed so many times. I mean, I started off with BDUs and then got desert BDUs and ACUs, and I don't even know what they call them anymore, but
OCPs.
OCPs.
Yeah, it was like multicam and then OCP,
Yeah,
kind of at the same time. Like I guess that
yeah,
maybe the design changed a little bit, but not enough to really notice.
yeah. And so the uniforms have changed. The dress uniforms. Oh, I love the new, the pinks and greens they call it. I
Hmm.
think that is the sharpest looking uniform I've ever seen. I
No,
think it looks,
100%, and it's
it's
Army.
great. Yeah, it looks like the Army. It doesn't look like, hey, we're the Army, let's wear an Air Force blue uniform. Why?
Yeah. Is there specific time in your military career that like when somebody asks you like, hey, or maybe they thank you for your service or whatever, but they're like, can you tell me a little bit about the Army? What would you say?
I would generally tell people that you get out of the Army what you put into it, and that the relationships you make in the Army are more important than anything you're actually going to do. I deployed to Iraq twice. Nothing I did in Iraq made a difference, but the people I met while I was there, the people I worked with, the people that shared foxholes with me and helped me do the things that I had to do, that is what the Army's all about. It's not about the places you've been, the battles you've gone through, the wars you've experienced. It's the people that make the Army what it is.
Is that why you stayed generally around U.S. soldiers still?
It is. After almost 23 years, I couldn't see myself not being around the military. I wanted to stay in contact, to have an impact, to be around the people. And even now, some of my closest friends are still in the Army and probably will be long after I'm gone.
What
The,
what about the relationship that really like makes you like want that or crave that?
you develop a bizarre sense of humor and a bizarre way of looking at things in the military.
Is that the dark humor
It
thing?
is, it is the dark humor, but it's also the shared humor, like sitting in a tent in the middle of the desert. Nothing is going on. You're bored out of your mind. You don't have a TV, you don't have your phone, you can't sit there and play games. You might have a book to read, but somebody will always bring up something. Hey, you remember that cartoon? Or hey, did you ever see this movie? And the next thing you know, 5 hours have passed and y'all have just exhausted your supply of random bull.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
It's it's an experience you don't get anywhere else. At least not in my experience.
So I'm coming towards the end of my career. I'm at 17, almost 18, and one of the things that I think is going to happen. So I'm not planning on staying around soldiers afterwards. I'm planning on staying in the area, but I want to do lawn care, hardscaping, landscaping. Uh, but I can see myself getting depressed or like in a funk because I won't be around. And from me being a 20-year-old to me getting out at 40 years old, that's my entire adulthood,
Yep.
and I don't know any different. So
Yep.
I think I can see myself getting in a very depressed mode.
Yes. When I first retired, before I got my first job on post as an instructor, I would wake up in the mornings and I'd sit down in my chair and I'd work on resumes and I'd work on job applications. And I had no idea what I was doing. Not with the actual stuff, but I had no routine anymore. The Army teaches you a specific time and place to be everywhere. That is it. I mean, where I got to be, what I got to be in, time and place, uniform. And your career goes fine if you do that. But when you get out, you don't have anyone telling you to, hey, you need to get up and go for a run today. Hey, you need to do some push-ups or work out. Hey, you need to get up and, oh, look, your grass needs cutting. No one is telling you to do things. And if you're not prepared for that, for example, I gained about 15 pounds in less than a month after I got out because I wasn't getting up and going out for those runs. force myself back into that routine of exercising daily.
That's interesting. When you first got out, was there a, were you still waking up at the same time, like automatically?
Yes, after a few days I was. The first couple of days after you get out, you're like, oh, I'm going to sleep in. And you wake up anyway, and then you go back to sleep. But even now, I mean, my day starts at 4:30 in the morning. I get up at 4:30. On the weekends, if I'm lucky, I'll stay in bed till 6. Not because anything's pulling me to it. It's I wake up, I'm wide awake, it's time to move. Drives my wife crazy because she likes to sleep in. I do not. So I get up, I take care of the things in the house that need to be taken care of, mess with my 3D printer, watch a little TV in the morning, watching things that nobody else likes. I'm a big sci-fi nerd, so.
What was your last 2 weeks in the Army and your first 2 weeks of civilian life? What was that transition for you?
Well, that was a huge transition all the way across because I was in Hawaii for my last 2 weeks, and all of that was, hey, let's get everything packed, and because it was just me and my daughter in Hawaii. My wife and my other daughter stayed here so she could graduate high school. So the last 2 weeks were all the moving and everything, and just making appointments and no time to really reflect on things. And then when I got on the plane in Hawaii heading back here to Virginia, it's like, oh, now what? And I knew what I wanted to do, but if you've ever looked at any kind of government job, you know that your timeline and their timelines don't match up. So I'm like, well, what if this takes 6 months, 8 months, a year to get the job I want? What am I going to do in the meantime? So I was looking for jobs, looking for another career, but I was depressed. It's such a huge change, and everything you know when you get out is upheaved. And it's just a huge shift in how your life is. And I was depressed. And that led to the weight gain and the just sedentary and just shrinking in on yourself.
So the depression kind of hits everybody slightly different.
Yeah.
You gained a little weight, but what was like your mental state in that? Was there like, was it cloudy, or was it just like you didn't see any future, or it was just unknown?
The unknown was scaring me. Depression took the form of looking inward and wondering if what I'd been doing for the last 20 plus years was worth it. Was it worth all the time away from home?
I can definitely see that being a thing for sure.
A lot of not finding much joy in things. You're supposed to be happy. Your career's over. You're retired. You can do whatever you want. And I didn't want to do anything. I was depressed.
Which is crazy to think about because when you're in, it's the same thing everywhere you go, especially when you're young in your career. It's like 3 days in a wake up,
Yep.
or whatever in a
Yep.
wake up.
And you're
And
constantly saying, this sucks. Can't wait to be out of this. Oh, yeah. Get it over. It's a change. Like you said, my entire adult life was in the Army.
yeah,
All
and
of it.
well, I wouldn't even say just your adult life. Like you were an Army brat or a
Yep.
military brat. Army?
Yep.
Yeah, so your entirety of your entire life. Really, I got two questions.
Okay.
The first question is, would you do this over again?
Yes, I absolutely would. Loved my career.
What about it that you love the most?
The people.
Yeah, you keep saying that. That's definitely a theme. That's awesome, and
Yeah, the
I can
people,
definitely
hands
see
down.
it.
I loved the places I got to visit, and I mean, went to Iraq and stood in the ruins of Babylon where Daniel was sentenced to death by the lions. I actually stood in the ruins. Where else are you going to get that experience? The places were great, but the people always made it what it was. If you're around a bunch of jackasses, it's not going to be a fun experience, but I was lucky. I had good people around me for 23 years.
Out of all the time that you've been in, what advice would you give our future generations that may or may not want to join the military?
Whew. I said it before, you get out of it what you put into it. Your mental attitude and your mouth will keep you or get you into or out of trouble. You're not on the block anymore. You're not back home on the farm. You're not wherever you came from. You're part of something bigger. Your effort and your attitude will mean more than anything else. It'll mean more than your education level. It'll mean more than your physical dexterity or your ability to run 2 miles in 15 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. Your attitude will take you places, good and bad, depending on your attitude, more than anything else. A willingness to learn, a willingness to work.